Okay, picture this. You step through these huge gilded doors, and it just hits you. Marble floors, gleaming, right? 1,000 candles flickering, gold light everywhere, these incredible tapestries. You hear silk gowns rustling. The air itself feels thick, with centuries of rose and amber perfume. And you think, this is it, the fairy tale, real life storybook stuff. Take a deep breath, ready for that? Like royal magnificence. And then it hits you, that other smell. It's sweet, yeah, but almost sticky, cloying. Perfume trying way too hard to cover up something, well, something much more human. Your eyes might even water a bit. Because the reality behind the fantasy it seeps in like poison through silk, This isn't the clean version you see in the movies, not at all. This deep dive, we're plunging right into the real kind of visceral world of medieval and Renaissance royalty, where, absolute power lives side by side with, frankly, horrifying hygiene. Divine right, it turns out, didn't stop things from getting, well, pretty unspeakable.
And that's really our mission for you today. We're going to pull out the surprising truths, often really quite shocking, about how the most powerful women on the planet actually lived. We'll dig into how their beauty routines were literally poisoning them, how these magnificent palaces became basically biological cesspits, and how chasing royal elegance often normalized personal degradation to a degree that's just staggering, really. Prepare to have your ideas about royal grandeur kind of turned upside down. It's a shortcut to understanding this hidden, grimy layer of history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the scene. 1580, Greenwich Palace. Imagine you're a servant, right? And you've got the job of prepping Queen Elizabeth I's monthly bath. Yes, you heard that right, monthly. 20 servants hauling bucket after bucket of water, filling up this wooden tub lined with linen. But the really awful moment, it comes when you help the Queen get undressed and you see her face. It's like a patchwork of cracked, flaky white paint, built up in actual layers. We're talking like geological strata to a vanity and poison, mostly from something called Venetian ceruse. It was a lead-based skin whitener, applied every day, but never taking off the old stuff first. What did that actually do to her? Physically, psychologically?
Well, what's fascinating or horrifying here is that this lead face paint, it wasn't just makeup. It was essentially a death mask. Like a ritual of slow suicide applied fresh every morning over yesterday's layer. So you get this ever-thickening mask of pure toxicity. And the lead, it seeped right through her skin day after day, year after year. It caused mood swings, memory problems, paranoia, increasingly erratic behavior. Courtiers noted her temper, how she'd forget conversations mid-sentence. They put it down to, the stress of ruling, never guessing their queen was slowly poisoning herself for that pale look. And the physical effects. They created this awful cycle. The lead made her hair fall out, so she needed these elaborate wigs. It grayed and puckered her skin, which meant she needed thicker layers of the paint to hide the damage. It rotted her teeth. Her breath got so bad that courtiers actually learned to stand specific distances away from her. You see, this wasn't really vanity by the end. It was an addiction, driven by the damage the poison itself was causing.
So it wasn't just a trend. It was like a slow, self-inflicted decline that actually fueled the need for more of the toxic stuff.
Yes.
Wow, that's insidious. Did anyone back then, or even later, figure out what was really causing her behavior and her physical problems? Or was it just, oh, that's the cost of being queen?
Very rarely. Almost never, actually. The common thinking just blamed natural aging or the stresses of the job or maybe even, God's will. The key insight here, really, is that for these royals, beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was the slow, agonizing self-poisoning, all normalized by the court demanding this kind of ethereal, unnatural look. These queens, they were basically prisoners of their own beauty standards, slowly dying for an ideal that killed them from the outside in.
But the personal horror, it didn't stop at their skin, right? What about those huge, elaborate hairstyles the royal women had? They weren't just fashion, were they? They were a bit more biological.
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on. Those towering monuments to vanity, they were, in reality, portable ecosystems filled with filth, decay, and actual living parasites. The construction process started way before dawn. The queen's natural hair, whatever was left after months of chemical damage and, frankly, parasite infestation, it would first get coated with this thick, rancid grease. We're talking bear fat, ox fat. This wasn't some fancy cosmetic oil. It was literally rotting animal fat. And these greasy hairdos. They became these writhing ecosystems. Fleas, lice, ticks. They didn't just visit, they moved in for good. Set up breeding colonies. Royal heads basically became living insect cities. And the powder they put on top, meant to soak up grease and add color. It just mixed with the fat, the insect waste, the grime, and it created this sort of pastel substance that hardened into a helmet of filth.
A helmet of filth, good grief. And I'm guessing these styles weren't exactly washed every day.
Oh, not even close. They'd be left for weeks, sometimes months, just continuing their uh, biological evolution up there, the psychological impact. It must have been immense. Can you imagine trying to keep perfect composure while your scalp is literally crawling with vermin? They even had these ornate scratching sticks, elegant little picks made of ivory or silver, designed just to discreetly reach through the hairstyle for a bit of relief from the constant itching and crawling. The core truth. These fancy hairstyles, symbols of elegance and status, were actually living, decaying habitats, masking this daily battle for dignity against a hidden world of parasites.
Okay, so if we zoom out from like personal hygiene to the royal courts themselves, sounds like the filth just got bigger, right? Tell us about the Great Lice epidemic and King James I. That doesn't sound like an epidemic, more like just how things were.
Yeah. It really was just how things were for many. Take King James, the 17th century, he famously never bathed. Ever. And the rooms he used, they were apparently literally filled with lice. This wasn't just his personal quirk. It led to a palace-wide infestation. It turned the highest levels of government into this crawling nightmare. Lady Anne Clifford wrote in her diary that after visiting the king's chamber, she and her whole family were all lousy. Imagine that. You're a top noble, dressed in your best silks, having an audience with the king, and within minutes, you feel that little tickle, then another, until your whole body is crawling with parasites that's just migrated off the furniture, the tapestries, maybe even the king himself.
Wow. So these weren't just annoying, they were a genuine threat.
Absolutely. These lice weren't just gross, they were disease vectors. Typhus, spread by body lice. It killed more soldiers than actual warfare in many campaigns. Royal chambers must have looked like something out of a horror movie sometimes. Dark corners thick with insects, furniture that might literally seem to move with lice, and the psychological torture, trying to conduct diplomatic talks or just maintain royal dignity during a state ceremony while parasites are crawling across your scalp. It must have been intense. The key insight, I think, is that despite all the grandeur and power, these courts were breeding grounds for disease. Systemic filth just undermined everyone's health, from the lowest servant right up to the monarch. Grand halls turned into biological hotspots.
And if you thought that was bad, we have to talk about Versailles, Louis XIV's amazing palace, right? Symbol of absolute power, peak royal grandeur. But what was the dark, unglamorous truth behind those gilded walls? What was the ultimate royal residence really like?
Ugh. The Versailles catastrophe, it really lives up to the name. The scale alone is hard to grasp. At times, you had over 10,000 people living in or around Versailles. Royals, nobles, officials, servants, soldiers. And the main problem? Almost no working toilets. Not just a few missing, but virtually none that were functional for that many people. This wasn't just an oversight, it was a systemic sanitation failure on a massive scale. Women would just pull up their skirts and pee right where they stood. Men would urinate off the balustrades, even in the middle of the royal chapel during services. There's that famous story about Marie Antoinette.
Don't tell me.
Yep. She was once hit by human waste being thrown out of an upper window while she was walking through a courtyard. Can you imagine? Queen of France. And it's just mind-boggling. How did anyone stand living like that? Sewage would leak into the royal children's bedrooms, even into the kitchens. The smell throughout the palace, it must have been indescribable. Just breathing would have been an act of willpower. Courtiers developed these really elaborate coping mechanisms. They had codes for which areas were safe. They learned how to avoid puddles, specific breathing techniques. A whole system of etiquette evolved just to handle living in what was basically a human cesspit. Even fashion played a part. Women's huge gowns, all those layers of skirts and petticoats, they sort of became mobile waste management systems, partly designed to hide ladies peeing where they stood, absorbing and spreading the waste as they moved around. The real takeaway from Versailles: absolute power without basic sanitation can turn even the most stunning palace into an unimaginable biological nightmare. It forced an entire society to adapt its manners, its fashion, just to cope with pervasive human filth.
Okay, so given all this, this overwhelming filth and stench, how did they even cope? That brings us to perfume, right? But it wasn't the luxury we think of today, was it? More or less.
More like desperate chemical warfare. Exactly. In these stinking, unwashed royal courts, perfume wasn't a luxury, it was a weapon. Survival gear, almost. Queens, noble ladies, they'd carry little bags of scent, pomanders, pressed to their noses constantly. Not as fashion, but to block out the smell. They wore perfumed gloves. Their hair was drenched in oils so strong you could smell them across the room. But underneath all that aromatic armor, The grim reality of unwashed bodies, rotting teeth, clothes unclean for months, and the ingredients themselves. They were often olfactory sledgehammers, as you said. Huge amounts of musk, ambergris, that's a waxy substance from whale digestion, believe it or not, and civet, which is a glandular secretion from civet cats.
So really strong animal smells, not delicate flowers. And did it actually work? Or did it just add to the problem?
Often, it was counterproductive. Perfume put on top of unwashed skin would mix with body oils and sweat and create these new, sometimes even more nauseating odors. This desperate attempt at masking things created social hierarchies based purely on smell. If you could afford the really potent, expensive perfumes, that was a clear sign of status. Nobles who couldn't afford the strongest stuff found themselves literally pushed to the edges of gatherings. Their weaker scent armor left them vulnerable to social exile, basically. The key insight here is that in an age of overwhelming stench, perfume wasn't about pleasantness. It was a desperate, often failing chemical war against decay, and it highlighted both the extreme conditions and the class divides who could afford to mask it best.
What's truly fascinating, though, is how power got tangled up with the most intimate personal degradation. You mentioned the groom of the king's close school. That sounds like satire, but it was serious and powerful.
Oh, absolutely serious and incredibly powerful. It's one of the most amazing paradoxes of medieval court life. This wasn't some low-level servant job. Quite the opposite. The groom of the king's close stool was often a man of the highest esteem. He wielded influence that senators, even generals, could only dream of. His job? To carry the king's portable toilet, the close stool, and yes, the most intimate and, well, degrading part, cleaning the king afterwards. This meant physically handling the king's waste, cleaning his unwashed backside, often with just rough cloth or maybe even bare hands, tending to his most private functions, all while maintaining court ceremony and dignity.
So they were basically human toilet paper for divine monarchs. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But they had immense power. How did that work?
Exactly. This man, doing the most debasing job imaginable, was privy to the king's absolute confidence. He heard everything, secrets, fears, plans. He'd often rise to a position of enormous influence, participating in top-level policymaking. There was no stigma attached to the job, actually the opposite. These men became some of the most powerful figures in the kingdom because they had this incredibly intimate access to the king during his most vulnerable moments. Treaties were signed, wars declared, executions ordered, sometimes in rooms thick with the smell of royal excrement, while one man knelt, wiping another man's unwashed backside. The key takeaway. In these courts, the most degrading intimacy with power could, paradoxically, lead to the highest influence. It completely flips our idea of what status even means.
And speaking of twisted ideas of purity, this next one is truly a systemic horror story. The Spanish Inquisition against soap.
Yeah.
Tell us about Queen Isabella and this idea that being clean was heretical.
It's genuinely shocking. Under Queen Isabella of Castile, certain Christian doctrines saw bathing as, well, a corrupt practice, hedonistic, unreligious. Cleanliness became literally heresy. And this wasn't just, a personal opinion. It became official state policy. Hygiene turned into a capital offense. After they conquered Granada from the Muslims, Muslims weren't just forced to convert or face the Inquisition. They also had to give up bathing. Isabella and Ferdinand ordered the beautiful Moorish baths destroyed. Bathing was strictly forbidden. Inquisitors would actually inspect homes for signs of bathing. They'd look for soap or clean clothes or any suspicious washing activities. If you were caught, you could be burned alive as a heretic.
Just for washing. Basic hygiene could get you executed. And what were the sort of global consequences of this thinking?
The psychological torture alone is immense, isn't it? But the global impact is even more shocking. When Columbus came back and reported that the indigenous peoples in the Americas bathed daily, Isabella was horrified. She commanded her new subjects to stop this blasphemous bathing practice at once, which of course inadvertently helped spread European diseases among populations with no immunity, all in the name of Christian purity. In Spain, the purity of blood laws even extended to hygiene. Families had to prove not just Christian ancestry, but also essentially Christian uncleanliness. The core truth here is terrifying. Dogmatic religious beliefs, when mixed with absolute power, could lead to a systematic war on basic human health and dignity, with devastating global consequences.
That is utterly chilling. Okay, for our final glimpse into this world, let's talk about the milk bath deception. Countess Platen of Hanover. Sounds charitable, maybe, or was it something much darker?
This story, it just reveals a staggering disregard for human life, perhaps unintentional, but staggering nonetheless. Picture the scene. The Countess is suffering from a distressing malady, almost certainly syphilis. She's lying submerged in a bathtub full of warm milk. Her skin is covered in open sores. Her body is consumed by the infection. The milk bath wasn't a luxury. It was a desperate attempt to soothe her burning skin, find some relief from the agony of advanced disease. Disease. But here's the truly chilling part. After her bath, the Countess generously donated the used contaminated milk to the local poor.
She gave the infected milk to poor people. How is that seen as okay?
The psychological cruelty, even if unintended, is just breathtaking. Here's a woman so diseased her very presence could infect others, and she chooses to soak her sores in milk, then pass that same contaminated liquid to hungry peasants as an act of supposed Christian charity. She genuinely believed she was doing her Christian duty, sharing her abundance. But the grim reality, she was spreading infection, turning charity into a potential death sentence disguised as kindness. The undeniable insight is how unchecked power combined with this profound social and class disconnect can breed a capacity for cruelty, even unintentional cruelty that's truly astonishing, where charity itself can become a vehicle for disease and death.
Well, so as we step back from all these, frankly, horrifying glimpses into the reality of royal life, one thing becomes incredibly clear, doesn't it? The fairy tale of clean, beautiful royalty is just that, a fairy tale. Beneath the gold and the silk, royal life was often a biological nightmare. It was a world where vanity, deeply ingrained tradition, and immense social pressure all combined. They created living conditions that, honestly, by any modern standard, would qualify as torture. These queens, these noble ladies, they weren't necessarily monsters. They were often victims of systems that valued looks over health, ceremony over comfort, and status over just basic human dignity.
And this really does raise an important question for all of us, I think. When you turn off this deep dive, when you go back to your clean, modern life, remember these forgotten queens. Remember that underneath all the crowns, all the ceremony, these were just people. Trapped by accidents of birth, living lives of unimaginable discomfort, just trying to hold on to their humanity while their own bodies, their own environment betrayed them day after day, year after year, until death finally released them from their gilded prisons of filth. Perhaps the most shocking truth, really, is how easily our view of history gets sanitized, and how much we just take for granted in our own daily lives.